answer what questions you have to our ability. And it's great to see that there's a large number of you on tuning in today. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm so glad to be among my colleagues of the Bears Ears Commission. My name is Davina Smith. I am the coalition representative on behalf of the Navajo Nation and also the proxy on behalf of Council Delegate Curtis Unito. Thank you.
Thanks so much to the folks from Bears Ears Commission for that welcome. Now I'm going to turn it over to Michael Engelhardt with the Forest Service for some information on the project.
Excellent. And we heard from the Navajo, the Zuni, and of course, I believe co-chair to be is joining us remotely from the Ute tribe. And then I also want to mention the Ute Mountain Ute representative, Malcolm Lehigh, as well from the White Mesa area. So thank you to our tribal partners for your introduction and your warm welcome to the participants in this call. I think that's a great springboard into talking about how this plan is developed. And it's not developed by one person or one agency or from one perspective. And so I'd like to just introduce you to a little bit of the participants in the process of developing the draft resource management plan as we presented to the public at this point in time. By and large, what we have is we jointly manage the national monument between the U.S. Forest Service and the Bureau of Land Management. We do so from the offices of the Moab Monticello Ranger District and from the Monticello Field Office. Of course, that includes the Manti La Sal National Forest and the Canyon Country District from the BLM as well. But very special to developing this plan, as per the proclamation, the Bears Ears Commission was established, and we have the distinct pleasure of developing in partnership, in co-stewardship of this land, lands that are sacred for time immemorial amongst the tribal nations of the United States here. And the Bears Ears Commission, of course, is represented by the 5 tribal nations of the Ute Mountain Ute, the Hopi, the Navajo, the Zuni, and the Ute Indian tribe. It's also important to note that in addition to the involvement of the Bears Ears Commission tribes, we also involved 32 tribal nations in the development of this plan. Those are tribal nations from the region, from the Four Corners area, including the Pueblos of New Mexico, the tribes of Arizona, Utah, and Colorado. So certainly thrilled to have our tribal nation partners standing with us, helping us, guiding us, teaching us, helping us learn about traditional Indigenous knowledge and the bettering our management of the Bears Ears National Monument. Also want to mention that we have significant partners, what we call cooperating agencies through the NEPA process in the state of Utah, with the Public Lands Policy Coordinating Office, the State and Institutional Trust Lands Administration, of course, the Division of Wildlife Resources, the State SHPO of Utah, and the Utah Department of Natural Resources. Also very important partners are our local governments, San Juan County, Grand County, the cities of Blanding, the town of Bluff, and the city of Monticello have all been involved and participated in the developing plan. We'd like to also thank the elected officials that have engaged us in the process of developing the plan, including Senator Mike Lee, Senator Romney's office, Representative John Curtis, Representative Blake Moore, and Representative Burgess Owens, as well as former Representative Chris Stewart. Other federal agency and partners have been involved as cooperating agencies, including the National Park Service, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and the Environmental Protection Agency. And of course, as consulting parties, we've reached out to a number of organizations. Many of them have signed on as consulting parties. And of course, the national representation from the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation. As a bit of a project summary here, the Bears Ears National Monument Draft Environmental Impact Statement, draft resource management plan came about as a result of Proclamation 10-285, which restored the Bears Ears National Monument boundaries and the conditions that existed prior to December 4th, 2017. And it retained the 11,200 acres added to the monument by Proclamation 9681. Proclamation 10285 requires development of a new management plan for the entire monument. And that's what you've seen and we'll have a chance to comment on and ask questions on today is the draft environmental impact statement and resource management plan for the Bears Ears. The planning area encompasses a total of approximately 1.36 million acres of federal land in southeastern Utah. Of forest system lands, that's about 289,000 acres, which is the majority of the Monticello Ranger District outside of Monticello, Utah, to the west of there, and Blanding. And then, of course, we have the Monticello Field Office, the BLM, which the monument encompasses the vast majority of that field office responsibility as well. Want to just run down a little bit of the project schedule. We filed a notice of intent to develop this plan on August 30th of 2022. Again, we're developing this plan jointly between the two federal agencies in coordination, in cooperation, and co-stewardship with the 5 tribal nations of the Bears Ears Commission, and in working with our consulting parties and our cooperating agencies. We released the draft resource management plan and environmental impact statement on March 8th of 2024. The public comment period will go through June 11th. So there's a 90-day required public comment period, and the clock started shortly after that March 8th publication of the draft RMP. The proposed RMP, the resource management plan, and the final environmental impact statement will be published sometime around October of 2024. So within a few months here. The approved resource management plan and the record of decision is planned to be signed in January of 2025. The public comment period is an incredibly important part of the process in developing a resource management plan. We know many folks hold sacred, hold dear, hold of importance their experiences, the love that they have for the Bears Ears landscape. And gathering public comment is incredibly important for us as federal agencies to hear from you all, what you believe is the correct direction, the correct path forward in managing the national monument. We hope that in publishing the RMP and EIS, the draft RMP and EIS, that you will see our general direction in which we're going, as well as see as the range of alternatives that are presented in there between the action alternatives of B through E and the existing management, which is captured in alternative A. The opportunity for public and community members to comment is incredibly important along the process for us to give a check on our ideas for the future management and involve you all in creating a landscape we all can be proud of for its management, for its care, and its condition for future generations to enjoy. The 90-day public comment period, as I mentioned, started on March 8th and it concludes on June 11th. You will have that time to submit a public comment. You may submit it in one of 3 ways. You may submit it online through the e-planning website, and the link is here, and I believe we're going to post that in the chat of this meeting as well. It's the same BLM website where you registered your to attend this Zoom meeting. Please share that widely. We want as much participation as possible in gathering public comment. You may also mail the Bureau of Land Management Bears Ears National Monument at the address listed here. And then you may submit a comment card or at our public meetings. We will also have court reporter present at our in-person public meetings. You may submit a comment card or have the court reporter record that at the public meetings as well. So again, we're just incredibly thrilled to be at this point where we are gathering your public comment And we're hoping that today will be educational for you all to help shape your comments in the best way possible to represent yourselves and those you hope to illuminate your use of this land and the importance in which you see this land. Just a little note on submitting a comments. Substantive comments are incredibly important when submitting comments to federal agencies. The most useful public comments are those that raise questions about the accuracy of information or the methods used by the federal agencies in framing the range of alternatives presented in the draft environmental impact statement. Also, a very useful comment are those that present new and relevant information for analysis, such as research reports, personal knowledge of locations, resources that are out on the landscape, uses that are important to you. Those are all very important things to hear. And then those public comments that present reasonable alternatives to what is currently being presented within the range of alternatives, which, as I said before, are between A and E. The comments are not used as votes for alternatives, so we don't look at public comments as simply a voting process. We may receive 100 in support of that and 100 in support of that, but that's not exactly how we look at the alternatives. What we do is that comments that express opinion or preference for one alternative or one course of action over another, they will not receive a formal response. However, we can still consider that in our decision-making process. Just a little introduction to the e-planning website. Many of you folks have seen this before. As I said, this is the same site which you use to register for this Zoom meeting. You may go to this website. I want to make sure that you all know that volume 1 and 2, the PDFs are available in full on these websites, on this website. The quickest way to submit a comment, or the way to submit a comment, is to go to the Participate Now button found on the e-planning website, and that's where you submit your public comment. And a very useful tool that we have on there is the interactive map. That interactive map is a way to virtually see the space being considered, as well as the alternatives being considered for the management of the National Monument. You may select, turn on and off various layers. You will see this as an example in this slide, where you see the presentation of the virtual map on the left, and then the various categories or layers that you could select on and off. So you may be able to hone in on those things that are you're most concerned about, such as what does it look like spatially to look at alternative E in relationship to grazing, or in relationship to roads, in relationship to recreation management. Please, they all correspond with sections within the chapters of the draft environmental impact statement. This is an incredibly useful tool for folks to spatially see and what you're concerned about, or what you may want to explore more in depth. And it's also a way for you to zoom in and see things at very minute scale. In order to use the planning website, simply open your internet browser and type in either the two links above. Either one of those will work to get you to the e-planning website. You may also just simply Google BLM e-planning Bears Ears National Monument RMP, and you will come to this website where you've got a full range of options on your left-hand side, with your home button, which you will see kind of a project description through that. You will also see all of the public meetings, ways to register for the virtual public meetings through the Zoom link. You will see a link to the documents as well. And maps, how to get involved, as well as the timeline of the project. And down at the bottom on that left side is that Participate Now button. That brings you to a section where you can select that Participate Now button, and you'll be able to submit your comment. Moving on to the next slide here you will see what that looks like for you all. You'll be able to type in your comment, type in your name, address, your information there, and submit that comment along. So you'll be able to type that out in that section, and then click that submit button in the lower right-hand corner of the e-planning website. We have a number of public meetings scheduled for the Bears Ears National Monument Draft RMP. We've done so in order to involve as broad an audience as possible here, get those interested members of our communities involved in submitting these public comments. So you will see, of course, we're attending our very first meeting here on April 16th with this virtual. I will point out that May 2nd, there is also a virtual presentation. It will be the same or very similar to the one given today. We also have a meeting this week in Salt Lake City. That is at the Marriott University Park. And then on the 23rd, we come on down to Blanding, and at USU Blanding, we'll be holding another in-person public meeting. Also one in Twin Arrows on May 6th at the Twin Arrows Casino Resort. And then the following day, we'll be in Albuquerque at the Courtyard Marriott, presenting an in-person meeting there. And our final one is in Monument Valley on May 16th at the Monument Valley High School. And I will go ahead and turn it over to Jake to discuss a little bit of an overview of our draft resource management plan, and some of the various sections that we think you will all, and an overview, and then some other sections that we believe we believe through experience and what we've heard so far would be the most helpful, or those that are the most of interest. It's certainly not a full round out of the entire RMP, but just a number of slides to introduce you to some various areas of consideration in the draft resource management plan. So Jake, go ahead and take it away, sir.
All right, I appreciate it, Michael. Thanks for the intro there for how e-planning and all that stuff works, and a little bit of background. I think today, what I foresee as one of the goals of this meeting is to help provide a little bit of information to everybody who may be just a little bit curious of what's in this plan, answer some questions that you may have, so that as you prepare to submit some public comments, maybe you like different aspects of different alternatives, or you like a specific alternative, but you just have a few questions of what does that actually mean in terms of management on the ground. I think hopefully today's meeting will help address some of those questions that you may have, and then empower you to be able to make good substantive comments to us, the Forest Service and the BLM, as we move through this process. And I think this draft resource management plan that's been released to the public is now part of this public comment period. I know some people may just be wondering, why is it that the BLM and the Forest Service are developing this type of a management plan for Bears Ears? And, simply put, back in October of 2021, President Biden issued a presidential proclamation restoring the boundaries of Bears Ears National Monument. And then part of that was also saying, BLM Forest Service, you will create a new management plan for Bears Ears National Monument. And that proclamation sets out a framework, sidebars essentially, of what the management of Bears Ears National Monument will look like. So today and throughout the management plan, you may hear kind of a common phrase as we talk about protection of monument objects. So I just wanted to kind of put that out front. And objects are essentially different resources or things that are important on the Bears Ears landscape that the president in his proclamation identified as things that need to be protected. And so as we kind of discuss the range of alternatives of this draft management plan, I hope we can all kind of keep that in mind, as that is the minimum bar that we have as agencies as we develop this draft management plan and move into a proposed management plan based on public input and other coordination with state and local governments, tribal nations, and everyone else who's participating in this process. And so I think it's important that this range of alternatives is kept at the forefront of everybody's minds, that all of the action alternatives B, C, D, and E, the minimum criteria, the minimum bar is that they have to protect monument objects, the things that are identified within the presidential proclamation. And so I think we created a range of alternatives that protect the resources while also taking different approaches to how that happens. In some cases, different development may be, if we're developing a certain area that provides additional education and information to visitors, that may, in a way, protect the resources that are there. Or in some cases, limited development. So like, I'll just kind of go through this slide here. B is a little bit more permissive and focuses on on-site development to provide education for protection. That's kind of the theme of that alternative throughout the plan. It's not going to be the case kind of throughout the entire alternative, but essentially that's the theme of that alternative. Alternative C is more of a limited development, but focuses on off-site education for protection. So essentially, it could be a permitting system or more emphasis on, maybe online education or other forms of education to help protect and inform people as they visit so that they're visiting more respectfully. Alternative D is a focus on natural processes and limiting discretionary actions as a way to protect the monument objects, the things that were identified in the presidential proclamation. And then alternative E is an emphasis on traditional indigenous knowledge with consideration of natural processes and seasonal cycles. And I think all of these alternatives have been developed with traditional knowledge and incorporation of that knowledge into the way we manage this landscape. All alternatives do acknowledge and focus on that. E is just a little bit more of an emphasis on that. And as part of BLM's planning regulations, a preferred alternative is identified at the draft resource management plan stage. When we released that to the public, which we did back in March 8th of last month, we identified a preferred alternative in this range of alternatives. And so the preferred alternative for the agencies is alternative E. And as we considered that range of alternatives, which of those alternatives was closest to meeting that purpose and need of developing this resource management plan? And so, this alternative E or this preferred alternative does not constitute a decision. Like alternative E is not necessarily just going to move forward as the proposed plan for Bears Ears National Monument. That is why we're in a public comment period right now for 90 days, is the public and everyone else can review the draft management plan, the range of alternatives, and provide comment of, there could be different aspects of different alternatives that may represent your opinions or ideas of how the landscape should be managed. And so I think as we as agencies get all of this public input and coordinate with the state and local governments and other federal agencies and tribal nations and the Bears Ears Commission, we can move from this draft resource management plan to what we call a proposed plan. And it can be kind of a blend or a mixture of all of this range of alternatives as we strive to come up with the best management that we can for Bears Ears National Monument. And so that's why this 90-day public comment period is so important as we gather that input and help us understand maybe where some of these alternatives may fall short, or maybe where they're good or not so good. And so I think all of this public input is valuable as we consider how to move forward to developing a proposed plan for Bears Ears National Monument. So essentially that's the next step, is we'll get all this public comment and we'll review all of that and find a way to move from a draft plan to a proposed plan that would actually be, instead of a range of alternatives, we would have a proposed plan that comes out of this phase of the planning process. So I think we're gonna move into some more specifics of some uses and the management of different resources within Bears Ears National Monument. And today it's hard to kind of do a deep dive into some of these management actions for these different resources or resource programs like recreation, but we'll get into them a little bit, and then hopefully if there's questions about any of these or other things that we don't actually get to in this meeting, hopefully submit those questions and we can address those as we move through this meeting. But we'll start with recreation here. Recreation essentially has become one of the primary uses within Bears Ears National Monument that the BLM and the Forest Service find themselves managing for in the boundaries of Bears Ears National Monument. And so this table is kind of a breakdown of some of the management within Bears Ears National Monument. We'll kind of talk a little bit about this first row there that talks about recreational zones. That's an approach that's in alternative E and is a little bit different from the bottom two rows here, where we have special recreation management areas and extensive recreation management areas, which are more traditional agency designations for recreation throughout the monument. And then another important topic to highlight here is target shooting within the monument, recreational shooting. Various proposals in a range of alternatives to consider of areas that could be open or closed to target shooting. And so you'll notice that the range is anywhere from the entire monument is essentially open to target shooting to the entire monument being closed to recreational shooting within the monument. And so the range is anywhere in there, and we continue to work with the Division of Wildlife Resources and the state of Utah and tribal nations on this topic within Bears Ears National Monument. But we do have a pretty wide range there as we consider how to move forward with target shooting in the boundaries of Bears Ears National Monument and the appropriateness of that within certain areas of the monument. And so just to clarify a little bit on the lower end there on alternative A, where the monument's open, and even all the other alternatives, just because it shows lower numbers, I think it's a management action that prohibits target shooting in developed recreation areas in and around cultural resource sites, and gives us the flexibility to close target shooting in the future as well if there's resource concerns that come up as a result of target shooting. And so there's some adaptive management kind of built into most of those alternatives there. And then we'll jump into some slides here with some maps about recreation within the monument. So this is current management of recreation. We manage things based off of currently off of special recreation management areas and extensive recreation management areas. And it provides the agencies a framework to focus how we're managing the recreation in those specific areas. So this is the current management. And if we move to the next slide, it shows alternatives B and C and these recreation management areas and what we would call recreation management zones within those that are kind of a more zoomed in, focused approach on the recreation management there. And I think the highlight here is it's not that we're emphasizing recreation as the use within that area. Recreation is a huge use in those areas. But I think a recreation management area also provides us a framework to protect resources within that area. And that could be a primary purpose of having a recreation management area designated, and a recreation management zone it's a recognition that the recreation is happening there, and also recognizing that the purpose of the monument itself is to protect those specific objects like we talked about earlier from the presidential proclamation. So the whole point is to identify where recreation is happening and how can we manage that recreation to protect the monument objects at the same time. Because that's the balance that we as the agencies have to find is allowing for these uses that are recognized in the proclamation as valid and important uses of this landscape, like recreation and like grazing, but still protecting the resources that are there. So I think we'll quickly scroll through these other maps. For alternative D and alternative E is slightly different. It's a different approach. And if anybody's familiar with Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument, it may be a little bit similar to kind of a zoned approach that they take over there. A little bit different here in Bears Ears National Monument, but there's various zones that would be used to manage recreation throughout Bears Ears National Monument under alternative E. So there's a front country zone, a passage zone, an outback zone, and a remote zone. And so you can see here on the slide, each of those zones are defined of what kind of the intent is behind each of those zones. And so considering time, I think we'll, if you guys have questions, these definitions can be found of what each of the zones are in the plan itself. And I think in alternative E, it's also important to highlight that public is encouraged to stay on trails when hiking, and the trails would be designated through implementation level planning. So I think there's been questions on what that means to encourage people to stay on trails. And there's a lot of people that visit Bears Ears National Monument, on average, probably somewhere around the 500,000 visitors per year mark of who's coming to this landscape. And I think many of those people would probably appreciate, knowing exactly where they can go for a hike based on, their, family situation or the time they have available to come out here. And so I think encouraging people to go to specific places that are prepared for more people to go to is important. And it doesn't mean that people can't hike otherwise throughout the monument. We just encourage people to stay on those trails that are more prepared, and just to be able to protect those resources. And then, but it's not a prohibition on hiking anywhere within the monument. Also under this alternative, there's dispersed campsites and areas would be inventoried and monitored, which I think some of these things are also kind of common throughout all the alternatives. And then, designating campsites through implementation level planning. So just future planning efforts as we focus on some of these zones and considering how we manage some of the recreation there. And then also special recreation permits required for all organized groups over the size of 15 people. And then a prohibition on certain activities within the monument, like paragliding and hang gliding and base jumping and the other activities that are listed in the bullet. And so I think we'll move on to the next slide here. We'll move into travel and transportation. I know there's a lot of questions about access within the monument as it pertains to OHV use. And so I just wanted to quickly go over some of these topics. In this resource management plan, the draft, what we've done is we do area designation. So we're not making decisions on specific routes at this moment in time. What we do is we have area designations that are either open, limited, or closed. And so an open area is a place where you can just drive anywhere. It doesn't matter if there's a road or not a road there. So there is no open areas where you can just drive wherever you want within the monument. For the most part, it's limited or closed. And limited means that you're limited to travel on a designated route, which those designated routes would be determined through a travel management plan, which would be done in the future. And then a closed area is closed to OHV use. And so if you look at this map here, the darker kind of crosshatch there is closed areas to OHV. And then the rest of the monument there is limited to designated routes. And so, there will be a travel plan that we'll develop in the future to go route by route and determine, what management will need to be for each specific route segment. If we there's kind of a view at some acreage, and we'll just kind of fast forward to some of these maps to get an idea. These are routes that would be affected by travel area designation. So if have an OHV area closure, which routes could be impacted by that? And so currently there's no routes there. It's kind of hard to see on these maps because essentially there's none there, but there's little red routes that show up on there that would be closed under an area designation. So if we go to alternative B and C, these maps show that there's essentially no routes that would be closed as a result of the OHV area designations. And then alternatives D and E, you can see under alternative D, because of the area closures that are happening, where we're drawing some of those bigger areas that say it's a closed area, there could be, or there would be some closures to specific routes under alternative D. And then in alternative E, there is one route. If you go back to that last map, there's one route under alternative E that would be closed as part of an area closure. And I assume there will be some questions later on about that, but that will be Arch Canyon would be the route that would be impacted by that area designation as closed for the Arch Canyon area. So I think, I assume we'll probably get some questions on that, and we'll address that a little more in detail later on. So going through grazing within the plan, grazing is an allowable use within the monument and is pretty clear within the proclamation that existing permits and uses would be allowed to continue as according to the proper care and management of the monument objects. And so in this draft management plan, there's a continuation of grazing throughout the monument. There's some slight reductions in acreages available to grazing, but would be no modifications to the amount of AUMs that are within each allotment. And so I think you can see from this table, there's the slight reduction there, and we'll kind of go through some maps of areas that are available or unavailable to grazing. And if there's more questions related to grazing beyond what we're able to cover in these slides here, I'll be happy to answer some questions as well. But you'll see the green within the monument is available to grazing, and the gray is unavailable. And then there's a couple other colors. Yellow is trailing only, and then orange is trailing only or emergency grazing. And so this is the current management that's up on the screen right now. This is how we're managing it. And this is alternatives B, C, and E. There's a slight addition of areas that are unavailable to grazing in very specific areas that essentially are inaccessible even now to cattle and haven't been grazed in some time. So those have been added to areas unavailable to grazing. Alternative D has a little bit more of a reduction in acreages available, and then more trailing only areas based on some data that we have for the allotments in those areas is where some of that information is coming from. So I think that's a quick overview of some of the highlights of topics within the management plan. And I think we'll transition now to some questions and answers that we can dive in a little bit deeper into what's in the plan based on the questions that you all have. So Sarah, I'll turn the time back over to you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jake and Michael, both of you, for the presentation today. Just as a reminder, our panelists will remain online to answer questions for the duration of the scheduled meeting time, which is about another 40 minutes. If you would like to submit a question, you may click on the Q&A button in your Zoom toolbar, type in your question and click send. For questions that we run out of time for today, we will be providing a summary of questions received and responses on the project website after the final meeting. So I think we'll start with a question for you, Michael. We've talked a lot about recreation and trails already in our presentation today. And so if you wouldn't mind coming back on camera with me. Michael, I'm wondering if we could talk a little bit about some of the maps and trail and road closures.
Yes, absolutely. So we received
yeah, no, you're fine. So I was just going to say we received a question
yeah.
that says that the maps are somewhat confusing, and wondering which trails and roads with a description will be closed and how will this affect access to climbing walls?
No, absolutely. Well, thanks for the question. And Sarah, I jumped the gun and made the assumption which question you were getting to here. So we were on the same track. Absolutely. So we received a question just that, you know, the maps and the data can be confusing. And that's why I do want to point folks to that interactive map, because it really does allow you to zoom in and see it more finite than you could ever see it in a printed map or a PDF map. You know, just some discussion about, you know, which trails and roads with a description that will be closed, and will that affect access to climbing walls? So travel management decisions at the land use planning level include travel management area designations, which designate areas as open, limited, or closed for motorized vehicles, or OHVs. Route designations occur only as part of an implementation level planning through a travel management plan, which is, we often refer to that as a step down planning. So that would be a next planning effort for the Bears Ears National Monument would be travel management. So no alternatives close access to existing climbing trails, but a number of the alternatives do have management pertaining to climbing. Under Alternative D, approximately 419,000 acres of lands managed to protect wilderness characteristics would be designated as OHV closed. Approximately 190 miles of OHV routes would be within those closed areas and would be closed, which is described in Chapter 3. And then under Alternatives D and E, they also designate Arch Canyon as OHV closed area, and one route in Arch Canyon would need to be closed under these alternatives. And thanks for the question. Good question.
Yeah, indeed. Next, I think we'd like to take a question related to tribal engagement and protection of ancestral land. Jake, wondering if you can help to respond to this one. So Jake, this question asks, which of the plans allows for the most oversight of ancestral lands by Indigenous people?
Yeah, well, thanks, Sarah, and thanks for whoever submitted the question. I think I'm happy to answer the question, and maybe I'll pass this on to Vice Chairman Andrews as well to help me after I'm done, if he wants to fill in and provide some response from the tribal perspective as well. But I think generally speaking, Alternative E, it really has a special emphasis on the incorporation of traditional Indigenous knowledge. And you know, the tribes of the Bears Ears Commission have been involved in the development of all alternatives, actually, and each of the alternatives, they ensure that their perspectives are found throughout all of the alternatives. And so, you know, also I think the draft management plan in this section, there's a section of the draft plan that's labeled management actions common to all resources and all alternatives. And that's in Chapter 2, I believe. And it has an entire section on tribal co-stewardship of Bears Ears National Monument. And so, that section, it isn't specific to any one alternative, but it's something that the agencies do in management of the monument in general, and that'll be part of the plan. So this section of tribal coast stewardship essentially states that the BLM and the Forest Service will collaborate with the Bears Ears Commission in all management of Bears Ears National Monument, and it sets up a framework for kind of how that will happen within Bears Ears National Monument. So, it's not necessarily specific to one alternative, but it's kind of a common thing throughout all alternatives. But there is an emphasis in alternative E that really emphasizes that traditional perspective and understanding. And so Commissioner Andrews, Vice Chairman Andrews, I don't know if you have some additional thoughts there on this question.
Thank you. Thank you, Jake. So for the question, I think what sticks out to me the most is the most oversight of ancestral lands by Indigenous people. I think as stewards of the land and I'm going to say, as stewards from Indigenous people, it should be stewards of all people that should protect these lands. We have an inherent right to protect ancestral lands, and if you're looking at Mother Earth, however you want to say it, we should have some kind of protection over these areas, not for just us. We have cultural areas that need protection out here, but overall, as Indigenous people, as Hopi, I think I'll just go ahead and put Hopi as being Hopi. We always have to look out for the protection of our children, people that come and visit these areas in the future that are going to be visiting. I mean, that should be our primary focus in this whole effort. And I believe that's kind of the education that we're both as agencies and as tribes, we're teaching some of that on how we were raised as Indigenous people, as tribes. So, and we talked about also recreation. We look at recreation differently. I think at times we do go out there and recreate, but if you see Native people, they're into like hand games, hunting, that sort of stuff. Is not really recreation, but it's something that we do for our food, to pass time. There's hand games, nothing that would actually destroy the earth or anything that's inhabiting the earth. So as far as to the question back again, most oversight of ancestral lands, I think that would require all of us to protect these lands as people, not just Indigenous people, but as all people, all walks of life. So I just want to I don't know if anybody else wants to chime in, but I think that would be my perspective on this. And thank you for the question. Thank you. Okay.
Thanks so much, everyone, for that response. Next, Michael, I think we're going to take a question about, let's see here. What about dark skies?
Yes.
Yeah, which is a great one, right? Let's look at this.
It is.
Yeah, this question asks, will planning take into account the need to protect the dark sky status of the monument?
Yeah, absolutely. And we know folks care about their dark skies. We live on a landscape where the sky is absolutely gorgeous day and night for sure. And so, yeah, the plan does include management actions for dark skies. The actions are in the visual resource management section of the plan, which is section 2.4.13. So in the range of alternatives, there are actions to protect night skies. And some of those would include limiting artificial light, limiting permanent lighting, and shielding of lights. So please, for whoever asked that question, please review that section 2.4.13. If you have I'd love to hear your comments on our protection of dark skies. So thank you very much for that question. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much. Jake, let's see, next up, we have a question for you about OHV use. And we're going to kind of take it as a two-part question, I think. Yeah, so the question is, when would the proposed closure of the Arch Canyon Road take effect? And kind of why is the Arch Canyon Road being closed to OHV use?
Yeah, well, I think good question. And I think this is a question that a lot of people have been asking me throughout the local community here. And so I think it's an important question and happy to answer it. I think, you know, Arch Canyon, the Arch Canyon area, in two of the alternatives D and E, as we kind of talked about in the presentation just a few minutes ago, those are areas that would have area designations that would be closed to OHV in the Arch Canyon area. So as a result, you know, that would mean that the Arch Canyon Road would be closed to OHV. All other alternatives within the draft management plan, Arch Canyon would be a limited area for OHV, and we would make a decision at a travel management plan phase of what we do with the road in Arch Canyon. And so, you know, the rationale, you know, why is it that we're closing Arch Canyon in two alternatives? Really, it's an area designation. We're not focusing on the road specifically itself. It's an area designation for the Arch Canyon area. And, you know, that area specifically, it's rich in cultural resources. There's water in there, and there's wildlife, and there's important plants that are also, you know, culturally important. And so, you know, I also think that, you know, Arch Canyon also has kind of it's long been a desirable location for multi-day backpacking trips, which, you know, hasn't necessarily been ideal for backpackers to get in there while there's motorized vehicles that are also continually present within the canyon. And so in consideration of these two things, you know, sensitive resources like wildlife and cultural resources and water and other things, and the user conflict potential, you know, the agencies felt it was appropriate to consider a range of alternatives that considers, in a couple alternatives, an area closure for Arch Canyon. But I will reiterate that, you know, it is a range of alternatives to consider, and that no commitment to this area closure has been made at this time. You know, we'll consider public input in how we proceed from a draft plan to a proposed plan, and how we manage that Arch Canyon area as far as the OHV designation. And, you know, as part of the second part of that question, I guess it was the first part, you know, when would the proposed closure happen or take effect in the Arch Canyon area if that alternative was selected? You know, I think if that alternative is selected and there's an area designation of closed for the Arch Canyon area, essentially that decision takes place immediately upon signature of the record of decision, which would tentatively be scheduled for, you know, late in the calendar year this year or beginning of the year next year. So essentially that's the timing on when that closure would go into effect.
Thanks, Jake. So our next question addresses grazing, Michael. The question is, will the EIS address the damaging effects of grazing, both sheep and cattle, and the presence of feral horses within the monument?
Yeah, it's a good question, and we know folks are very interested from various aspects and positions on grazing within the national monument. So very much appreciate the question. Yeah, absolutely. as Proclamation 10285 proclaims, grazing is an allowable use within the monument, though itself it's not an object of the monument. So it's allowable and can occur within the national monument. So the EIS does address impacts from a variety of uses, including grazing. And all I can do is perhaps point the individual who asked the question to Chapter 3 under the environmental consequences section in Chapter 3 of the EIS to see how we've analyzed that. And I do look forward to any comments that may help us look at that through your perspective as well. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Michael. So Jake, next up we have a question about target shooting. So our questioner asked, would target shooting, including the use of weapons like rifles, shotguns, and bows, would target shooting include the use of those weapons for hunting game animals?
Yeah, well, thanks for the question, whoever submitted that one. I think this is another topic that comes up quite frequently in conversations is hunting and how will some of these decisions impact hunting. I think one important thing is, we've been working with the state of Utah and the Division of Wildlife Resources on a definition of target shooting or recreational shooting within the monument. And so that will be, as part of input from the state of Utah and Division of Wildlife Resources as part of this process. We will include that within this plan. And it is not something that will limit people's ability to hunt wildlife or other game that they have, legal permission to, if they have a tag to hunt whatever species. And there's some game that also doesn't require a hunting, a specific permit or tag. And so none of that legal pursuit of wild game would be prohibited by any of these recreational shooting management actions within the range of alternatives here.
Thanks so much, Michael. Or sorry, Jake. Thanks so much, Jake. Michael, let's talk about what are the agency's plans to implement and ensure cultural site rest and closures, should that alternative be chosen?
It's an excellent question, and it gets to one of those main themes in alternative E, which about rest cycles, seasonality rest, rest due to use throughout time. So great question, and I'm glad you're asking it. So yeah, I'm gonna give a bit of an agency answer, but I want to make sure that we invite some members of our coalition commission to answer here. So I'll probably turn it over to Davina to round out the answer. But in short, agencies will continue to collaborate with the Bears Ears Commission on implementing resource rest for cultural sites and other monument objects. Implementation could include on or off site interpretation, signs, education. It could include some seasonal closures for other uses out there, out of protection for objects of the monument. And of course, as Jake said in the beginning of the presentation, protection of the objects of the monument is absolutely paramount within a national monument. So while cultural resource sites are definitely mentioned in the proclamation, and we know they're very important to this landscape. This landscape's incredibly rich in them. And so yeah, absolutely. We will continue to collaborate with the Bears Ears Commission on implementing any resource rest or needs for protection for cultural resource sites. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Davina Smith, the representative from the Navajo Nation on the Bears Ears Intertribal Coalition and the proxy for Commissioner Yanito from the Navajo Nation. Davina.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Sarah, for that question. As I want to continue to emphasize on alternative E, which is the traditional indigenous knowledge. We as tribal tribes, each of us, have implemented each of our tribal values especially when it's discussion on land resting. And of course, that it pertains just that land rest, which is a form of resting, and it's regenerating and of giving pause to the land, because it, most importantly, it allows that soil to replenish for a number of nutrients that benefit for not only for Indigenous people to harvest plant medicines and to use for us to eat, but also for ceremonial purposes and also for our wildlife as well. Another is water. I think that's another area we haven't looked at as well, as water is another place that applies towards land resting as well, the use of water. So giving pause to these certain areas, I think it's really important for these for the nature, but also for us as Indigenous people, that we do utilize it in a sense to say it's a grocery store. We see it as a grocery store. And so we need to be patient and let it replenish and give its nutrients for all of us to use, whether that's going to be for us to ingest, but also for our animals and for us to take part in just embracing what the values it gives to us. And again, as Michael and Jake had said earlier, agencies will be making these decisions in collaboration with the Bears Ears Commission. So, and that also I want to say, lastly, in other words, tribes cannot and will not close the monument. So I just also want to include that as well. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Jake, our next question relates to wildlife. So Jake, the question is, will an ACEC be established specifically for endangered, threatened, or sensitive species, such as amphibians?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. Thanks for the question. And I think I'll start by kind of giving a little bit of background of what an ACEC is. I'm not sure if everybody on the call knows what an ACEC is. And so just in short, an ACEC, it's an area of critical environmental concern. And it's a concept that was created under the Federal Land Policy and Management Act, or FLPMA, which is the law that defines BLM's mission. And so ACEC designations under FLPMA, they highlight areas where special management attention is needed to protect and prevent damage to important resources like historic resources or cultural resources, scenic values, and fish or wildlife, which I think was part of the question here when you mentioned amphibians and endangered and threatened species. And then also it gets at some natural systems or processes as areas that can be protected under an ACEC. So with a little bit of that background, I think there's 7 ACECs that are proposed within the range of alternatives in this draft plan. 2 of those are publicly nominated ACECs that folks from the public or other agencies have written comments to us that we need to consider certain ACECs within this plan. So if you want a little bit more information on ACECs and how they're proposed to be managed under the range of alternatives, you can look under the section in Chapter 2. It's labeled Special Designations, and that's where you'll find the ACECs in there. And the values and resources that the ACECs protect, it kind of varies. And in the range of alternatives, there's the Johns Canyon Paleontological ACEC and the San Juan River ACEC. And those are in some of the alternatives. And those are the ones that were determined to have values that include fish and wildlife. But with that said, no ACEC was publicly nominated specifically for threatened or endangered or sensitive species. And so with all of that said about ACECs, I think there's a lot of important species, both plants and animals, within the Bears Ears landscape. And some of these species, they're listed as threatened or endangered or sensitive within kind of the BLM and Forest Service framework. But I think, there's two primary sections of the plan that kind of address those wildlife and plant species, vegetation species, where the management plan has specific goals and objectives and other management actions to help protect fish and wildlife and other sensitive species. But there's also a lot of plants and animals that are important in the Bears Ears landscape. They're important traditionally for cultural purposes, and they may not have our federal labels or management requirements or stipulations that come with threatened and endangered species or other sensitive species. And there's also considerations in the plan to work with tribal nations and the Bears Ears Commission to better understand those species and provide effective stewardship of their habitat. And so in all cases, these plants and these animals, they're identified in the presidential proclamation. Again, these monument objects, these are to be protected as part of the management of Bears Ears National Monument. So all alternatives seek different options to protect these species, whether or not they're in an ACEC or not. But there are a couple alternatives where there's some ACECs, specifically like Johns Canyon and the San Juan River ACECs, that recognize fish and wildlife as resources to be protected within those ACECs. So kind of a long-winded answer there, but hopefully that addressed the question for you.
Thanks, Jake. So for our next question, Michael, and perhaps Commissioner Sanchez, a question for you. What is different about Bears Ears management compared to other public lands? Will tribes be allowed to steward these lands in a deeper way than on other ancestral lands? I see dark skies, soundscapes, and other cultural resources may be managed for, but I wonder what changes in comparison to other lands.
Yeah, excellent. I'm going to lead out with this response, but I can't wait to hear Commissioner Sanchez's additions to my response here. So the draft Bears Ears National Monument Resource Management Plan is very special. It was drafted in collaboration and through a cooperative agreement with the Indian tribe of Utah, the Hopi tribe, the Pueblo of Zuni, the Navajo Nation, and the Ute Mountain Ute tribe. The Bears Ears, those are the tribes that comprise the Bears Ears Commission. So all the alternatives, as we've said before, include consideration for that traditional indigenous knowledge. More so, let me just add that it's not just the content and consideration for traditional indigenous knowledge, it's the understanding, the relationship building between our nation and the sovereign nations represented by the Bears Ears Commission, to help us build and grow together, to see worldviews, perspectives from the traditional indigenous nations that help us manage land better together. So this is the first land management plan developed in collaboration with tribal nations and includes continued further in-depth collaboration. And you'll see that throughout the plan, that this isn't one and done. We don't develop the land management plan and then the Bears Ears Commission goes their separate way. They will be involved for years to come on implementation level planning. And we'll be doing this together with the Bears Ears Commission on into the future within the framework of the final EIS. And so with that, I wanted to turn it over to my friend and member of the Bears Ears Commission and representative of the Zuni, Head Councilman Sanchez. Could you help elaborate on this?
Thank you, and I appreciate the question. So as far as the role of the commission that makes this management plan different from others is, as the Bears Ears Commission, we work closely with the U.S. Forest Service and the Bureau of Land Management to develop a draft resource management plan that incorporates traditional knowledge from tribes experts. And it allows the tribes the continuous opportunity of passing of our traditional knowledge in cultivating our youth in learning and managing their ancestral footprint. in this cultural significant area of importance to the tribes. The biggest thing is, as tribes, we do steward our own lands as well. And as far as the second part to the question, yes, tribes will be able to provide recommendations to the agencies regarding how the monument should be managed according to their knowledge and expertise. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next question has to do with research in the monument. Jake, how will the plans, especially the third option, accommodate scientific research within the monument?
Yeah, thanks for reading that question, Sarah. I think it's an important question, is also a question that we've been getting a lot of feedback on as we hear people talking about the draft resource management plan, and some of their thoughts about it is the scientific research availability throughout the monument. It is a kind of an important landscape that a lot of research has been ongoing for a long time, both related to cultural resources, climate change research, recreation research, a whole bunch of things that have been connected to scientific research within this specific region. I don't know if I mentioned paleontological resources as well, a lot of research around that as well. So I think the draft of this resource management plan, it recognizes the importance of scientific research, but it may provide a kind of a different or unique approach in how to consider and carry out scientific research within the monument. So for example, in the section labeled management common to all resources and all alternatives within the draft plan in chapter 2, it discusses the need specifically for increased scientific research and also the creation of a science plan. But I think that all of this new scientific research or the science plan would be done in a way that gives equal consideration to traditional knowledge and not just scientific research from a Western science paradigm. And so I think there's a little bit of a unique approach there to how we approach scientific research and finding ways to incorporate traditional knowledge into those types of research studies. And so an example of that, which we've had a lot of feedback on, is under alternative E, there's a research, the research around paleontological resources. It may not allow for the extraction of those resources, and new methods of study may need to be explored and considered. Paleontological resources in some instances could also be considered cultural resources. And I think there's some conversation to be had of how do we move forward with studying paleontological resources under this kind of different paradigm? Is there new approaches that we can consider in working with the paleontological community? Or, is there, something we need to do differently in terms of the range of alternatives and how we provide for specific research for that type of resource, as well as, other types of scientific research that goes on in this area. So I think, in short, scientific research within the monument is something that is seen as important. We just need to find a unique approach of kind of considering traditional knowledge and traditional perspectives kind of on equal footing with Western science paradigms as we move forward in those different types of research. So appreciate the question. Thank you.
Thanks, Jake. And thanks for that question. So our final question, probably here for this evening, as we have only about 5 minutes left in our time together, is about drones. So Michael, what will be the regulations and rules for flying a UAV or drone in Bears Ears National Monument?
Yeah, excellent question, and a very common question that gets asked. So management actions on drone use vary within the range of alternatives, just like every other topic. There's a variance in the range of alternatives. In all action alternatives, landings and takeoffs of motorized aircraft may be authorized through a permit where the use is beneficial for protecting the monument objects. Alternative B would then limit landings and takeoffs of motorized aircraft, which includes drones, to routes designated to allow such use through the travel management plan. And again, that's a step-down plan. And the Bluff Airport and Fry Canyon Airstrip. Alternative C and D would limit landings and takeoffs of motorized aircraft to the Bluff Airport and the Fry Canyon Airstrip. And alternative E would generally prohibit the use of drones. Again, looking back for that authorization through permit where it's beneficial for protecting the monument objects. And of course, there would be administrative or could be administrative use of unmanned aerial systems, which are very important to land management from time to time. Thinking fire operations, thinking scientific investigation, and those types of things as well. And let me just say, as we kind of close out here, that may be our final question, but Jake and I absolutely realize that we have dozens of questions that were asked tonight. We couldn't possibly get to everyone. And so we need to thank our staff for keeping us straight as we got that. But thank you all for these excellent questions. Appreciate it. Back to you, Sarah.
Yeah, thanks so much. In the few minutes that we have left this evening, just want to make sure that I take a moment to remind you all about the rest of the opportunities to comment during this public comment period. So just as a reminder, the public comment period will end on June 11th. We have shared in the chat and in the presentation already this evening the e-planning website where you can submit your comments online. You may also mail comments to the Bureau of Land Management, Bears Ears National Monument, P.O. Box 7 in Monticello, Utah, 84535. And you can also join one of our in-person public meetings taking place over the next couple of weeks. And during those events, you can submit comments through comment cards, handwritten comment cards, or by speaking with one of our court reporters. And so, Michael, just want to invite you back to say any final words of thanks or pass it on to Jake for his closing remarks.
Boy, yes, we could probably do this together, Jake. I think, you know, this has been a very productive, eye-opening experience for me. Of the questions we got around to, we know there's 3 or 4 that we didn't quite get to, and we will make that commitment to answer through a summary of the questions we received today. Those things brought up by those attendees to this meeting, and additional questions as we get them throughout the process in future virtual meetings, as well as our in-person meetings. So thank you, thank you, thank you. There is a lot to digest in managing a national monument, and you all have put forth the effort to answer or ask very well-informed questions. And we just want to thank you for your participation today. I can't help but thank our tribal nation members that were in attendance today, and those that have been working in the background to help us develop this plan, along with all of our cooperating agencies and other partners, consulting parties and such and the like. So thank you very much. It's been a long time coming and represents a lot of work. If you did not get your question answered today, or if you submitted multiple questions and you didn't get them answered today, feel free, reach out. We will post a summary of answers to the questions, but also Jake and I are very open to discussing with public members some of the things that are on your mind. By all means, it's my job and it's a pleasure to do that. So please reach out to do that, and make sure that you submit comments to these 3 methods on the screen so we can consider those as we develop the final EIS. And a big thank you to all of our staff working in the background. The attendees can't see it, but you know, dozens of questions coming through, and we had some mad typers, mad researchers looking up answers and making sure we had good answers for everybody up here. And at any rate, just a big thank you to everyone. And it was a joy spending my afternoon with you all. Jake, any final comments from the Bureau of Land Management?
Thanks, Michael. And really thank you to everybody who took time out of their day to join us and to learn a little bit more about the plan. If possible, also encourage everyone to attend in-person public meetings and happy to address more questions or comments there at those public meetings. And encourage those within your communities to participate in all future public meetings over the next couple of months as well. I understand how important the management of the Bears Ears landscape is to so many. There's a lot of you that you make a living off of how this off of the landscape there. If you're grazing or have an outfitting or guiding company, or you make cherished family memories and recreation opportunities out there on the landscape, or it's a place where you practice traditional cultural heritage or other practices that are so special out here on the landscape. All of these things are kind of happening out there, and we as the federal agencies are trying to find an approach that one protects the monument objects, as we've talked about from the presidential proclamation, but still also allows for some of these uses to continue. So it's a fine line to walk, and a balance that we're trying to find, and really appreciate all of the public input and comment that we'll receive, and understand that there's some concerns that some people may have about some of the alternatives in the plan, and hope you'll submit some comments that reflect that to help inform us. And just really appreciative of the process as we try to do our best to manage this landscape. And so I think with that said, just thank you for your time and participation in the process. Sarah, I'll turn it over to you to close it out. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jake. Thank you, Michael. Once again, thanks to our panel working behind the scenes, and thank you again to all of you, many of you who joined us this afternoon, this evening. With that, this meeting is